Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Reroute Reflections. It is episode 8 this time, and look who it is. We have a special guest, a returning guest, who's not really a guest. She is actually, we're going to flip the tables actually this time around. I am so tired of interviewing other people on my podcast. I want to be the one talking. And so we were like talking about it. It's a new year. This is a podcast coming out in February. We had some time to reflect, make some little mistakes in January. And now we are fresh and ready to go, sort of. A little bit exhausted still, a little bit overworked. But we got a real exciting episode in store today. And I am so excited to be on the other side of things and actually being able to talk for most of the podcast. Maybe I'll get featured in some of the social media posts now.
Yeah, you get to be all the teaser trailers now.
I know,
not whoever your guest was.
I know. I feel like I should have worn like a better top or something, like a nice little shirt or tie. So I got to make sure I'm looking good for the gram. So yeah, I don't even know what to do with myself right now because I'm usually the one starting to kick things off, doing the introduction. So I'm just gonna hand it off to you. And you can start asking me all of the questions, and I'm going to be on the spot this time around.
Yes, I will be your host today. I'm Rebecca. If you haven't listened to earlier episodes or seen me before, I am Andrew's wife. Not in change management in my role. So today I'm going to be trying to ask some questions that maybe you've thought before, maybe you haven't, but as someone who isn't in change management, I'm hoping that we can kind of create some insightful conversation still. Our topic today, we're going to talk about different trends kind of starting to shape change management in 2026. Reroute had an article last year kind of outlining what trends you thought would shape 2025. So I feel like it's good timing to kind of reflect on those, see what happened, see what didn't, and then maybe make some predictions moving forward, and talk to how organizations and people can get ready for 2026 and make the most of their change management practitioners.
I always say,
so
yeah, I know I'm going to interrupt because I always say
yeah.
with all of my clients and every time I work, I'm like, I wish I had a crystal ball so that but I don't. So I have no idea what's going to happen into the future. And here I am going to be talking about what I think is going to be happening into the future. And so I'm going to caveat all of this by all of this could be entirely wrong. I have no idea. Life is complicated, complex, and there's so many different inner workings and stuff. So really it's just thoughts and ideas around where I feel like, the future of change management is going to be. But who knows? I feel like 2025 was just this complete tsunami of stuff that we had no idea or could not have expected happen the way it happened. And so who knows what 2026 is going to have in store for all of us. But at least the way it's shaping now, here's kind of where I'm starting to see some of the trends unfold, and we'll come back next year and see how accurate I am.
Yeah, that's part of the fun, right? Is not actually knowing what's going to happen, but trying to make an educated guess, being someone that works in it full time, and then you get to look back the next year and see what happened and what didn't. So looking back for you, I guess, what are a couple of the trends that you think actually did materialize and happen, or maybe what are some that didn't actually quite land like you thought they would?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, right, so we did do an article last year, I think it was in March, so we were a little bit late to the game around the 5 trends shaping change management in 2025. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, you can take a look at it, see how right or wrong I was. But, the overall, I think a lot of the stuff that we had captured in that article, we, as in me, captured in that article last year has really unfolded the way that we expected. I think it's continuing into 2026 in a different way. It's almost like it's leveling up in 2026. But I think a lot of the same concepts that we thought were going to be central in 2025 were central. And I think they're just going to continue to kind of level up in 2026. So just to run through them a little bit, I think number one, I think everyone is shouting it out. If it's AI, that's literally what we said is number one going to be the trend for 2025, and it absolutely was. But what I think was interesting about 2025 was I think everyone was just really interested about this new shiny thing that is AI. I still don't think we've cracked the code on what it means to actually find the value in AI, and I think the kind of prevailing assumption all the time when it comes to innovation is this idea of first mover advantage. And if you recall on our podcast, we had Rick Nason on earlier, and I was just listening to his podcast actually yesterday as I was walking La Luna, and I was I needed something to go through. I was listening to Carl and Rick talk risk. It's a little bit of a tongue twister, but I was listening to one of their latest episodes, and Rick mentioned really something very interesting that I thought really resonated with me and exactly what I saw with organizations in 2025. And it's this concept that in history, organizations that tended to be first movers in disruption tended to be less successful than the second and third movers. And that kind of intuitively makes a lot of sense, right? Because with something like disruption, there's always this like mad dash towards trying this new thing out. And really nobody knows how to use it, how to find value from it. And we all kind of get that, right? We're using ChatGPT to like answer questions that prevent us from having to use Google because it's a lot easier. But that's just scratching the surface. It's only the tip of the iceberg of what ChatGPT can actually do for us. And I think organizations just like us are kind of in the same boat. They're like, well, I guess we could maybe use them on our website to answer questions from customers that are messaging us instead of humans. And we've all seen in the news how that hasn't worked out so well in some cases. So they're just like testing things out. And I think that's still the right approach. But I still don't think we've cracked the code on AI just yet. So spoiler alert, AI, I think it's going to continue to be a real strong theme in 26. But, I think 2025 was just like, ooh, fancy tool. Let's just do it. Now I think we're going to be thinking about like, less around adoption of AI and more around like, how can I get value out of AI and being a little bit more strategic. So that was definitely, one that I think that we called out and I think is definitely true. The other one was around leadership and the importance of leadership and active leadership, this idea of like using leaders or utilizing leaders as change champions. I have seen this firsthand in some of the work that I was doing in 2025. And I saw both the benefit that you can get when you do have like really strong leaders and change champions advocating for a change, really kind of being those second, third, 100th hand for the change manager to actually execute and be on the ground and really help to move the change forward based on the resources and tools and the materials that the change manager has provided to them. And I've also seen where that kind of doesn't work out. There's this lack of empathy, this lack of emotional intelligence or whatever, fancy, or lack of psychological safety or whatever you want to call it, which really helped become a detriment to the overall success of the change. And so no change there. I think, leaders are going to continue to need to be front and center. But I think what the focus is going to be on 2026 is this idea of like really emphasizing on readiness of leaders. I think we're underestimating that. We're always assuming leaders, because they're in a leadership position, intuitively have all the skills necessary. Maybe that's true. But regardless of if they have it or not, we're in this whole new age now of AI, even forget the organization, just outside of the organization itself, the political climate that we're in, the constant and exponential degree of change and uncertainty that the world is presenting requires our leaders to think outside of just the organization and really try to like hone in on what is affecting the employees so that we can help close the gap between what people or employees are thinking and what they're willing to say out loud, right? And that I think is going to be a huge focus for us, or at least for me, in 2026. And I think everyone can value from that. The next one was having employee experience at the center. It was interesting as I was reading through this article in preparation for this podcast. I was like, wow, this is so aligned to the podcast we had with Josh Hill on last month. And this idea of the importance of onboarding and the employee experience and getting that part right and trying to make sure that you've got the right fit for the employee, not just in the short term, but long term as well. And, Josh, the conversation that we had was super eye-opening and really helping to understand that fit doesn't necessarily just mean between the employer to the employee, but it goes both ways. It's like, does the employee fit within the organizational setting? And the importance of just making sure you're finding the right person at the right time for that seat. So employee experience, of course, will continue to be front and center in 2026, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The other items that we talked about was, this idea of data-driven change management. I don't know if I was like super right on that one. Maybe I was a little bit too early to the game. I think change management still hasn't really seen or hasn't really cracked the code either on like how we're going to be able to use AI and leverage it to our benefit. I think once we do that, we really will be able to kind of leverage and see the value of AI, but it didn't happen in 25. And then the last one was just around this idea of the emerging methodologies and frameworks. I do think that that happened quite. There were a lot of emphasis I felt when it, and it just is just me. And I'd be curious to hear anyone who's on the podcast or listening to the podcast if you thought any differently. But I definitely did see a shift in people getting away from just the pro sci thinking and expanding their minds beyond that. I think I've used that before, which is why I said it in a weird way. But expanding beyond pro sci and looking at everything that's out there and that's available, and really starting to see like, yes, pro sci has a really strong framework, but it is a framework. It is not a standard for change management. And I think the rise of associations like the Institute for Change Management, I think that's what they're called. I don't think that's what they're called. I can't remember their name. It's going to drive me nuts. But it's Institute for Change Management, maybe ICM. That does sound kind of right. Maybe that is right. But also,
You're asking the wrong person.
I know. I apologize. If you are from that association, I really do apologize. I'm not yet, but maybe I should be. And the ACMP, which is a member, I am a member of, and I work and volunteer for that association. That's the Association of Change Management Professionals. But I think the rise of, I'll just talk about the one I know because I don't know too much about the other. But for ACMP, really, I feel like I really saw them kind of rise and really start to kind of segment themselves as, I mean, aside from the new logo that they made last year, really cement themselves in as being kind of a standard for change management. And they are kind of framework agnostic, right? It's more around like the approach for change management, it goes beyond the framework. It's so much more than that. And I feel like ACMP is really helping kind of bridge the gap and seeing ProSci, Cotter, lean change. All of these are just frameworks and approaches to help kind of build the toolkit for you as a change practitioner in order to manage the change that may involve all of them, may involve one over the other. It doesn't really matter. And that kind of leans a lot into the conversation that Yvonne and I had a number of episodes ago around, the value of leveraging multiple frameworks. And so I do think that did move forward. What I see in 2026, we can talk a little bit about that, but I think we're going to continue to see this flexible hybrid approach, this very framework agnostic approach to change, which it needs to be. Change is dynamic, it's fluid, it's constantly evolving. Trying to, force a square peg into a round hole is just not gonna give you the value that you're looking for, and not the flexibility that you need in order to adapt on the fly. So yeah, overall, I think it was a solid list. I think I definitely think I was expecting AI to be in a much better position than it is now. I thought we would have cracked the code already, but I don't think we're even close. And I think that's just a testament to how complex AI is and how complex the implementation of it successfully is, that I do know organizations were underestimating in 25.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like that's probably a good segue then to maybe ask about how you think AI is changing the practice of change management, like moving into 2026 now, knowing what you know from all of last year. I guess, like, what skills are becoming more important for change practitioners when we're thinking about being able to leverage AI?
Yeah, and I think I'm going to even, expand that just a little bit in terms of like when it comes to the skills for change managers as it relates just in general for 2026. But I think definitely AI is a key element to that. Where I see the value of change of AI when it comes to change management specifically is I think it can potentially get us to a place where we're maybe solving that question that we've always struggled with, which is how do we quantify the value of change management? And I don't know how we can do this, but I feel like AI can really help us find a standardized way to take what is not traditionally, is a qualitative metric in the value of AI and really help to standardize it, and maybe specifically in this idea of like assessing our effectiveness overall, you know? And I definitely can see that there's a gap there that can be filled by AI to just take out kind of the subjectivity of it. And selfishly for me, what I think would be really valuable is to kind of take the information around a change that I was able to manage from start to finish, feed it the information, maybe develop some type of, AI chatbot or agent, I think they refer to it as, to really, based on those inputs, help to define or output a kind of overall assessment of myself and how I was able to manage that change, as a way to really help me with identifying lessons learned and how to move forward, with that. Organizationally though, and I know, we had this conversation in the pod. I'm literally like leveraging all of the podcast episodes.
I was gonna bring that
Yeah,
up.
it was like, I'm like, wow, it's definitely is linked. It's almost like they've all been building up into this conversation, which, given the context of it, actually makes a lot of sense. But the conversation I had with Chinkal, I think it was a couple of episodes ago, a couple of months ago, was on the topic of AI and what organizations are doing right, where there's opportunities, for improvement, and essentially what leaders seem to be missing, which was a great episode. I really enjoyed that conversation. I learned a ton from that episode. But some of the takeaways from that, and I think, that I think is going to be really key for leaders in 26, is this idea, and this I'll just say it. This idea is treating AI as a product, which I think is super important, and that's exactly how we at Reroute treat change management. We treat it like a product. And what that means is we pilot an approach, we try to test it out, and then we iterate it based on the feedback that we're getting from people, and then we take that concept or that construct and we scale it up to the organization. And as we're scaling it up, we scale it up to slowly, or at whatever degree we can. And that allows us to iterate as we go, to take advantage or to take into consideration the nuances that present itself once we expand that pilot out and we start to include other people into it, right? So taking an example of, let's say we're piloting an approach out in Toronto in Canada, and you are expanding that out into, all of Ontario. As you expand that out into all of Ontario, you're hitting kind of the southern Ontario, mid, and then north. Those people are different. They're going to approach things different ways. You expand it out into Quebec. Now you're dealing with, the French language and the cultural differences there, and you adjust and you accommodate for that. And eventually you get to an overall strategy that now has started with what we learned from Toronto, but has expanded beyond that into ways that we can make adjustments slowly and iteratively to get to a broader Canada-wide strategy. That's the concept of like product management, right? You create a minimum viable product, you test it out in the market, you get feedback, and you're like, oh, this worked. People love that. Let's add more features into this. It's like, we got feedback that we wanted more of this feature. Let's do that. Expand it out, start to share it out with everybody. And then you continue to get more feedback, iterate, and then you've got a product that's ready to sell to customers. And so that same rigor that we apply to, our products, we need to apply to AI as well. We need to apply to everything, really, because it's such a robust and strong approach. And that's also what we talked about with Josh, which was this idea of looking at the employee onboarding and the employee as a job as a product itself. You are marketing a job the way you would market a product. And if you use those same, principles, you'll kind of be in a much better, and it's a great way to reframe it. This idea of thinking about everything like you would a product, because that's where the money is, right? When it comes to organizations, they put so much money on marketing, they put so much money on products because that is a revenue builder. And that's the bulk of where their revenue comes from. But they're ignoring the expense side of the equation, where employees are the biggest expense that they have in all cases, right? I mean, maybe not all cases, but 99% of cases, your biggest expense is your people. And we're not kind of applying that same process, that same tried, tested, and true methodology that is product development that we do on the revenue side to the expense side. And I think that's a mistake. And so I think that once we see that differently, it changes everything. Like it changes how you perceive and how you approach so many things within an organizational setting. And for those who are able to like see through that and kind of that light bulb to go off, I think are going to be in a great shape to capitalize on AI. So going back to that question around change managers, you got to think that way too, right? You got to think about your changes as product people would treat products, and you think about how you approach change in that way. You're going to be set up for success, especially for changes that involve AI.
I love that you've already brought up so many of the past episodes that you've done, over the last 6 months or so. I think the last 6, 7
Probably.
of your podcast episodes this season have all been with different guests, right? And it's been really interesting now that we're reflecting back on your predictions for 2025 that a lot of those topics have come up already in your other conversations. So I feel like it's great because you've also probably had a lot of learnings from those conversations to now help guide you into 2026. So I feel like this is a good way for us to maybe start talking about how you think the change landscape is going to differ for organizations moving into 2026 now. Like what do you kind of see happening?
Yeah, so and one of the things that I really want to do, because as you can imagine, just given the way that I guess I'm approaching the conversation, is a very passionate topic for me, because I think it's so interesting, and I'm really interested in just sharing as much information that I have, and people can take it, ignore it, or they can take it, build off of it, and run with it. And so I do want to put together something a little bit more wholesome in this, and kind of take all the ideas that I have here and kind of put it into something a little bit more tangible. So actually, this podcast will launch when we'll have a new white paper out on this exact stuff. So what are the trends that are emerging in 2026? So if you're listening to this podcast now and you are interested in kind of getting a deeper dive into, what are the trends that I'm envisioning to be, kind of front and center for 2026, you can go onto the website rerouteconsulting.com, and you'll see a link to the white paper so that you can download that and read it, and love to hear your thoughts, because I'm sure I've only scratched the surface there. But just to give kind of an overview of some of the items that I think are going to be, front and center. We talked about it ad nauseum. It's to a point where I kind of just almost gag every time I hear the word AI, but you just can't help it. It just, it's everywhere. And so I do think we're going to be in this place of continuing to, refine how we can extract value from AI on both sides of the equation, from in terms of, change management, trying to uncover how we can take value from it, and organizations. I still think the ways of working or the ways of implementing AI into an organization, the best practices are still not yet known. And so I think we're going to continue to try and test out new ways of thinking. I think what Chinkal and team shared, I think are bang on when it comes to what you want to focus on. And we kind of talked about it, treating AI as a product, this idea of co-creating with your employees, getting back to the basics and really focusing on the foundational elements, the quote unquote boring stuff that we tend to ignore, but are super fundamental in avoiding this concept of garbage in, garbage out. We're talking about data governance, right? AI leverages data in order to build and provide you with the insights. If your data is garbage, you're not going to get great insights. So, data governance projects aren't, sexy. Nobody wants to work on them, but they're foundational, and you need to do that if you're going to actually extract the full value of AI. So are organizations going to do that? Absolutely not. They're going to focus on the sexy thing. And so there may be a little bit of rework that needs to happen, or simultaneously organizations are trying to introduce AI while at the same time cleaning up their data governance processes and the data quality that exists. So I think it's going to be a bit of a mix and mash, but those who do that first, I think are going to be more successful, in my opinion. And then approaching AI with intention, I think is this idea of really stepping back and not thinking about let's just use AI because everyone's using it, and really step back and say based on what we do today, where can we extract value from these tools. Like, what can AI really do to help level us up? And I'm at fault for this too myself at a small scale, at Reroute Consulting, how I leverage AI is not optimal. Right? It's just, I'll go into Chat GPT and it'll help me kind of like start an impact assessment. It'll help me try to like build up like a stakeholder analyses, or to just help me pull together like a deck. But is I really taking the full value of AI? Absolutely not, right? So I think there's still a lot of work to be done on everyone's front to try and crack that code, because I don't think we're there yet. But I will say, for those who are still on the idea of like, will AIs ever replace human beings? Maybe in my job as a change manager is at risk. It's not, right? If your job is at risk and you're a change manager, either the organization, you probably don't want to work for that organization if they think that, or you're not really doing a great job as a change manager if what you do can be replaced by AI, right? So I think that is that on that. And then this concept that I said, we hopefully in 2026 we move away from this focus on adoption of AI and move it towards strategy and really thinking about AI in a strategic lens. So AI, for sure, number one. The other check. The other piece which I talked about was authentic leadership, or leadership effectiveness, and this idea of really moving forward or trying to focus on being authentic as a leader and building that psychological safety within your organization and within your team. And it really has such profound impact. It sounds like an optional, nice to have sort of, ideal, but without it, you are really missing so much, right? And the value, especially as a change manager, from being in an organization or working with a team that has psychological safety versus one that isn't, is night and day, right? Your effectiveness as a change manager exponentially increases when you're working with a team with psychological safety, because they're telling you exactly what's on their mind, right? Good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Because they feel safe to be able to share that without any consequences. I'll give you an example of what I've had happen before to me, and I'm sure anybody who's worked in any project, this has definitely happened before for you. So I'm sure this will resonate. I remember working on a project, and we were and in most status reports, you'll have like a color coded convention or whatever to determine or to signify whether a status is, on track, deviating, or at risk. And so usually in most cases it's yet red, yellow, or green. And, you put on, and when I remember doing this, putting on the status, and there was one change, I can't remember what, but it was yellow, right? And I tracked it as yellow. We presented it, and as I was presenting it, it was maybe like a 15-minute tangent on an hour call, specifically around why do we call this yellow? And, even though the definitions were defined, and like it was all about, why yellow? Like, or I've had these conversations where it was like, well, let's not use yellow. Can we use like white instead, or maybe a blue? And it's like, who cares, right? Like, yeah. why are we talking about this? Why are we wasting all of this time on that? And I think it sounds funny, and it is definitely funny. I was definitely felt a little bit different on the call, more anger and frustration than anything else. But when you think about what that signals to everyone on the call, after I get berated for putting something rightfully as yellow on the presentation slide, everyone on that call looks at that and is like, all right, doesn't matter if there's an issue happening, we are not showing yellow on this slide, because I don't want to be the next Andrew and get, the 5th degree or 4th degree or whatever it is on that call with this executive. And so what happens? Issues never get raised. You don't know about it. And the executive who is, flipping out based on the color yellow is going to be asking questions upon implementation to say like, hey, why are we delayed? Why are these issues raised that I wasn't aware of? It's like, well, obviously, hey, no one
wanted to bring it up to you.
Nobody wanted to do it because you set that precedence of If
Yeah.
I'm, I'm superficial. I'm looking at surface level only. I don't really care about, outcomes. I care about, just this idea of looking good. That is very hard to backtrack on. So, long story, which is, kind of long story short, is this idea of like when you have psychological safety, nobody talks about the yellow. They don't talk about the color yellow. They talk about, okay, what are the issues there? How do we resolve it so that the next time we're doing the status report, that yellow turns to green? And we are encouraging people to raise yellow faster, right? We're
Yeah.
encouraging people to show things as red. I can't even remember the last time I was, whenever I put something yellow, God forbid red, that it didn't turn into a huge debate. And it's like, well, what's the point of showing these colors then? Like,
Yeah.
it's just, I don't understand. Like, why do it? It's like that you have to feel like comfortable and safe to put something as yellow. And you'll know that when you're putting on something yellow and your immediate reaction is like, oh crap, this is gonna be this is going to not go over well. And you'll know you're in a psychologically safe environment when that's not your first reaction when you do that. So I think really this idea of like, and to be fair to leaders, right? They've got their own pressures and all that other stuff. And so I really think it's going to be important about building that leadership readiness and making sure people understand, what psychological safety is, beyond just like the buzzword that it has become now, and really around like how that will help generate the outcomes that you're looking for to make sure that your change is successful, and really just making sure that we're training leaders around how to do that effectively. And that kind of leads into this other notion of mine for 2026, and that's this, as it relates to change management, is this marrying of two somewhat distinct fields that I think are starting to kind of meld together, which I am super excited about, which is the field of change management and the field of coaching. I think in a lot of, in a lot of cases, we've seen them as complementary, but we've never really put them together as part of the same project or same implementation. And we haven't incorporated them as part of the change management strategy. A lot of it is not because we don't value coaching, but a lot of it is budgetary, right? And so the idea of working one-on-one with leaders to help get them ready and coach them through a change requires a lot of significant resources and cost. And that's just not necessarily something that has been front and center, but I'm starting to see those conversations happen. And I will say that when I was working at the Bank of Montreal, we were working on change management back in the day, maybe 2020, 2010, maybe 2020, maybe 2012 or 14, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. We had in the change management group, we had strategic executive coaches who would help support branch managers and regional managers in coaching them as changes were hitting the branch to help kind of work with them and their teams in order to absorb the change. That model, even though it was so long ago, 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, it was so effective. But what happened? We got rid of them because it was an additional cost and we couldn't afford it and we were downsizing. But it affected our ability to launch change because you didn't have that support for leaders. So a lot of messages got missed. And that, I think, is a use case and just showing the value of what enabling these leaders will have for you as a change manager. And whether that's through coaching or what have you, or just training them up, it's super important to have people in the front line or people close to the front line advocating for you. And it's hard to have leaders do it all and be that person for you. And that's where I think coaches can really come in to close the gap. So I'm gonna call it. I think that's gonna be leveraged a lot more in 26, just because of everything we talked about. There's just so much happening. We're in this area of like constant exponential uncertainty, and so much change is always happening, that we're going to get to a point, and we have gotten to a point of overall change fatigue. And we'll talk about that in a second. But once you get to that point, you've lost it, right? As a change manager, there's nothing you can do now People are not going to look at messages. They're numb now to change. They don't care anymore. There's no motivation. And so with us, we are fighting against that as change managers. We fight against change fatigue. And I think that's another trend. I said I was going to talk about it later. We're going to talk about it in a second later. I think that's another trend. I think we as in me, I don't do a good enough job at looking at and measuring and managing change fatigue. We talk about it. We're like, hey, by the way, there's a lot of change. And the executive's like, yeah, I know. And we're like, okay. And then we move on to the next thing. It's like, we need to do a little bit more. I need to do a little bit more than that to really advocate, to say like, we need, to find a way to manage all of these messages all together. And so I think it's never going to be more important than it is for the years ahead. So definitely something to think about as something for 2026. The other thing I think will happen is this idea of, and it's kind of all encompassing, but I think this idea where we're talking about organizations where they're starting to think about AI and introducing it, and they're coming to the realization that some of the foundational elements in order to launch AI effectively is just not present. I think it's really going to get to the point where organizations are going to have to like think about like, am I set up culturally? Like my organization, are they culturally set up to do this, to be an innovative company that the future is going to look at with AI enabled, right? You're always going to be able to, now you'll be able to leverage all the data and come up with, ideas for the future in a lot faster way. And you're going to be able to be adaptable. But are your people that, right? Like, have you attracted these types of people that can actually optimize optimize your value from AI by taking the insights that AI is generating and then doing something with it? Like, are you built organizationally to do that? Do you have leaders that are, again, building that psychological safety for you and for the people to say, like, when someone comes to them with an idea, is the first thing out of their mouth be like, we've never done it that way, we're never going to do it again, and just completely disregard it? Or are they people that are be like, yeah, that's a great idea, why don't you take a look into that a little bit and then come back with a proposal, and we'll throw it up the chain and see what happens, right? Like, and so you really, I think, need to, or you as in leaders, senior leaders, need to look at your organization as you're thinking about AI and trying to draw the value out of AI. You really need to take a step back and look at yourself culturally and ask those really, insightful questions, strategic questions, to be like, yes, we can implement this, and on paper, yes, it can help enable us to do this, but are our people set up for being able to leverage that in the right way? And is that something we need to train them to do? Can we close that gap to train them up in order to achieve, to get them there? And or do we need to look at bringing on other people, and trying to, like, essentially this idea of future readying your organization now, right? And so I think that, and maybe that, I think that's already happening. I think people are starting to make that realization now to say, maybe culturally we're not quite there yet, and we need to look at the AI implementation as like a multi-year phased approach. And in the first year, focus on building those enablers, the first few years building those enablers, and culture is, I think, one of the key ones. Because you want a culture essentially that is curious, adaptable, and just an empathetic, really, so that you can have people who are leading as people should, the idea of empathy, this idea of curiosity, so that somebody comes to you with something, or they don't do something the way that you expect. You don't lead with anger or frustration. You lead with, that's interesting. Is there something in the process that's broken that we need to fix? And then adaptable. I mean, that's kind of my whole thing. And so, and in AI, it's going to be key to be able to adapt on the fly, because the pace of change is just going to continue to increase once AI is in place. So I think that's definitely something we'll likely see kind of more on. And I think the last thing I'll talk about Man, there's so many things. So definitely read the white paper. But I think, yeah, I think the last thing I'll talk about is, really this idea of like, I think we've always talked about, the importance of to back up. I think the goal of change management in a nutshell is trying to close the gap between, this enterprise level change that we want to introduce and boiling it right down to the individual and getting essentially like, to effectively change. This is a very pro sci kind of way of thinking, which is, in my view, completely accurate, right? It's the idea of like, for you to increase your likelihood of a successful change, you need to almost have a customized change plan for each individual, right? And that still doesn't work, right? Because as we know, we'll put a change plan in ourselves to eat better or to exercise more, and that doesn't happen always. And that's technically a customized change plan that we develop for ourselves, and we still don't get it right. But the idea here is like, so that's the idea. That's what you want to get to. But of course, you're dealing with thousands of people, 5,000, 10,000 people. No change manager or change management team will ever get the resources and funding to create 10,000 individualized change plans. So, but we've got AI now, right? So when I think about where the value of AI can come in from a change management standpoint, maybe that's part of like helping us crack that code and getting us to a place where we can actually create a stakeholder analysis, create sort of like plans to be able to adapt on the fly and better equip us to be able to manage change and enterprise level change at the individual level. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know how to do that, but maybe that's something that I think should definitely be part of the conversation because selfishly that would help me a ton. And I think that's it. That's all I got.
Oh, is that all?
Isn't that it?
Lots of things. I feel like it comes full circle, though, talking about how to really leverage AI to be able to more effectively do your work, to more effectively implement changes. But it's also that aspect of still needing that human touch, right? Like AI can only go so far, but then as the change manager, you still have to come in and acknowledge how hard changes can be for people and to help them pivot and come up with new plans, right? And to get leadership on board and create that culture of psychological safety and being set up foundationally for all these things. So I feel like even though you've listed AI and like a whole bunch of different trends you think are emerging, like they all tie together so closely. So it's going to be interesting to
Mm-hmm.
see how each of them can kind of help leverage the other one, right? To help them move forward in 2026.
Yes.
So that maybe there's a little bit more growth next year
Yeah.
because with 2025 and AI, it doesn't really seem like it has been leveraged or changed that much within a year. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're
yeah.
totally right about that. I think, and that is encouraging, I think, because when they're in, when they're distinct things, right, it's so much more daunting, right? But I think what that illustrates is if you do one of these things, and it will have, it will influence so many others, right? And so I think that's encouraging, given how long I talked about all of those things to know that they integrate within one another. If all you focus on next year is building up leadership capability, that's going to have an impact on building that psychological safety. That's going to help you with managing the onslaught of changes, whether they're AI or what have you. And so if you just do that, it's going to have a profound impact on so many of the other pieces. And if you focus on treating AI like a product and or just even just thinking about the concepts outside of product management as you would product management, even if you just do that, it will have a huge impact on how you manage change and how you launch initiatives like AI in 26. So yeah, I think that's an encouraging thought that they all kind of intertwine together.
Yeah. So I guess with that in mind and maybe to start, wrapping up a little bit, if the leaders who are listening are going to take away one mindset shift for change heading into 2026, what do you think their focus should be? What is like one thing you would say leaders should focus on this year?
I think if I were to sum it up, it would be, really this concept of just leading with curiosity, right? Not
Mm.
defensiveness, right? And they're kind of linked actually, now that I say it out loud. But yeah, lead with curiosity. So as things come up, instead of being defensive about it, So for example, I'm in change management. I send out a ton of communications, whether those are email communications or we're hosting a call, we're doing a town hall. I do a lot of these messages and stuff. And I'll be communicating over several months and we'll launch a new system. And sometimes people will be like, I didn't know we were launching the system. And some people could get very defensive about that because you've been working on that for months. You've been communicating nonstop in so many different channels. And somebody's like, I don't know we're doing this. And some people could be defensive about that. But for me, I look at that and I'm like, how though? Like, how, tell me how you didn't know. Like, I need to understand how you didn't know. Like that is where my head goes. Now I'm not going to go through the, you know, to figure it out. Cause I mean, listen, if it's just, 10 people say that, maybe I'm gonna be like, all right, one person says it. I'm like, all right, this might be a you problem, not a me problem. But I mean, I'm curious. Like I want to know how you don't know. Like, so
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't get it. How do you not know? And so I think that's what you need to lean into is when people don't do what you expect, just lead with curiosity to try to understand like why that is. And I think if you do that, you might uncover as you do it. Because at the end of the day, like you don't know everything, right? And so you might think that you do, but at the end of the day, if you are telling somebody to do something and then they don't do it, you can if you lead with curiosity, you might uncover that, oh, actually, there's a gap in the way that this is set up, or oh, there's a gap in terms of how I approach training this individual. And so I think leading with curiosity is definitely the way to go, and a focus for leaders. One kind of core sort of takeaway for sure into 26. I think it's going to be really important given everything that we sort of discussed already. And then the other thing that's really similar, and I did include this in the newsletter last month, and I want to talk a little bit about that really quickly. And this is this idea of like building that psychological safety, because I think it's really difficult to understand like how do you do it, right? Like it's great to talk about, oh yeah, like psychological safety. I definitely want to do that, but how do you actually do it? And I think one of the ways in order to do it is to practice this non-responsiveness or this concept of like non-response. So somebody comes to you with a problem, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life, immediately you want to kind of solve it. And so you want to come to them with like solutions to help them. And there's nothing wrong with that. That totally makes sense. They're having a problem, you care for the person, you want to help them out, so you want to give them a solution. I think one of the things to help is to not respond when somebody comes to you with an issue, and let them just talk and let them voice all of their concerns, all of their feedback. Wait for them to kind of finish everything that they said, and really just be there to listen. All right. And just don't respond. Don't necessarily respond right away. And I think trying to do that is just one I'm not very great at, as you can probably attest to, but I'm trying. And I think it's a really strong way of building that psychological safety, because when you give people the opportunity to kind of voice their concerns, their feelings, without them feeling like you're not going to listen to them or you're going to push it under the rug and just try to solve it so you can get onto other things. I think that has that negative consequence or that unintended consequence of people not wanting to come to you. So this act of just trying to, practice this like kind of non-responsive way of dealing with those issues as they come might, and it sounds so bad to say out loud, like practice non-responsiveness, but it's this idea of like just not responding right away and just giving the employee time to kind of share their feelings, which I think is really, really important, right? And I think that might also be called active listening. I don't know. There's so many terms out there, so who knows? There could be named so many different things. So I think, practicing that concept, I think will be really important in 2026. So yeah, curiosity and, active listening, non-responsiveness, whatever you want to say, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, which I think also like they again those two tie together so well. Like if you're as a leader trying to practice more curiosity when you're having people come to you with issues or trying to troubleshoot, like you said, it's not necessarily non-responsiveness, but it's being curious, right? And not just offering solutions right away or trying to tell them to, here's what you should do, ABC, but like asking more questions about it, right? To say like, have like, I don't know,
Yeah.
how is this impacting your everyday today? Like, how do other people feel? Have you talked to anyone else about this? Like, let's come up with something together. I think is going to create that psychological safety by actually collaborating with people instead of always being the boss,
Yeah.
right? And always just giving them a solution and saying, here's a solution, okay, bye.
Yeah. Yes.
So again, I think they're very closely tied together still, and it's easier to maybe digest thinking about that non-responsiveness if you think about it as like just trying to be more curious. I'm not trying to offer solutions right away.
Yeah, and you know what? I was looking at my notes and I'm like, it's not non-responsiveness. It's non-reactivity. That's what I wanted to say.
Non-reactivity.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
That makes way more sense.
That makes a lot more
I'm
sense.
like, non-responsiveness sounds terrible. That can't be right.
Right.
Yeah, I was like
just
trying to.
They're perfectly silent.
I was trying to find that. Yeah, yeah. Non-reactivity.
Yes.
Just don't react. Right.
Non-reactivity.
Lead with curiosity, which I think is the linkage there. Empathy and openness. And this note that I kind of wrote and I want to say is it's not about having the right answers necessarily when you're having these conversations. It's about creating that space for real conversations to happen. I think is the message there.
Which I feel like is what we've done today. You were able to
today.
break down some trends that you outlined last year, how they've come to fruition or not, what you think is going to happen this year, but also talking about it in a way that I think is practical and honest and has some real good actionable takeaways for people to work with moving forward, and especially with the new year. Thinking about things you can change in business, not just in your personal life, right? Making some of those resolutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it was really fun to be back. Yeah, had a great time. I always learned something new about change management. And
Are you really going to forget the change self? Come on now.
Oh,
Of course. Yes, I gotta give my change self. I'm always, we're always taking, I'm excited for the change self. This is like the whole reason I did this in the first place. So for those,
this is what happens when I'm missing my script.
right? I mean, that's okay. I think off script is more authentic, but yeah. So change self for everyone who hasn't listened in the past. It's an opportunity for us to really just take a second to ask the guest, which in this case is me, a resource, a podcast, an a book, whatever article that, is really been influential in, recently in what you're doing or has any relation to what the topic is. And then at the end of the year, we kind of summarize all of them up and we share them out. If you are curious about what was on the change shelf in 25, there's a post on LinkedIn, on socials, just around that. So you can take a look at that. But my change shelf for this one actually was actually yesterday when I was listening to Rick's podcast. I also then started listening to another podcast by Mel Robbins. So for those who don't know who Mel Robbins is, now I'm going to forget the title of her book. It's Let Them. Yeah, what is one of her more recent in books. And so she's got a podcast that has been recommended to me almost like 100 times. And so I finally started listening. And I was listening to the podcast from December 15th, How to Make 2026 the Best Year, 6 questions to ask yourself, where she kind of walks you through. And I think she has a workbook online that you can actually fill in as you're going to really reflect back on what happened in 2025 and a lot of kind of tips and tricks in order to actually reflect effectively. Because I find, it's almost like a really daunting task. I'm like, I don't remember what happened last year. And so some tips like taking a look at your photos in your phone and going back a year and taking a look through them to kind of start to trigger your memories around what had happened, looking at your calendar. If you use a calendar like me, is almost like a full detailed account of exactly what I do every minute of every day. It can be very helpful to use those. But I loved what she was doing and some of the questions that she was asking. I thought they were really thought-provoking. And in, light of the whole reroute consulting and this idea of rerouting, you can't reroute unless you kind of know where you've been. And you can't kind of take on another path, as she mentions, without, knowing where you started. And so it's really important to kind of reflect. And I just started it. I kind of stopped it because I wanted to download the workbook and actually follow along. So I will continue to pick that up. But I highly recommend it. I thought it was a really good kind of like guided reflection that she's pulled together. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that.
Yeah, I have it on my list already because you sent it to me
Yes, I
yesterday. Did you
did.
just send it to me
Yeah, it was
yesterday?
yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's on my list to listen to, and I think it is a good way to, actively take some time to actually do your reflection for the year because it is tough to find the time to do it, even though we have all that time over the holidays, but it
Hmm.
ends up filling up and going by too quickly. So,
Always, yes.
but yeah.
All right.
All right.
Yeah, well, now
Now,
do I say go or do I say bye? I guess I'll say bye.
I know,
I'll
I
say
guess
bye,
we both say
everyone.
goodbye.
Yeah, I mean, we could both say bye together, but thank you so much, everyone, for listening to this episode. I honestly really enjoyed being the one talking most of the time. As you probably got the sense, I love to hear myself talk.
Yeah.
And so why I started a podcast in the beginning. So yeah, it was really fun to be on the other side of the mic this time. And so thank you all for listening. If you've gotten this far through the podcast, well, wow, thank you so much for listening to me this whole time. I really appreciate it. And Becca, thank you so much for taking the time out of your super busy schedule now to, host this episode. I'm really excited to see the reaction. And yeah, thank you all for listening, and we will talk again next month. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.